Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I want to talk about some of the major changes that have been announced or just sliding into the beta over the last month or so. Specifically, I want to discuss things that have now ended up differently than what I've mentioned in previous videos. There's a lot to go over, so let's get started. A big part of the theory crafting around the Torghast experience was figuring out how high and how easily you could do layers 1 through 8 on the first week. That week you aren't going to have access to Raid or Mythic Plus gear, so I was looking forward to that fun challenge before Torghast becomes largely irrelevant. In an interview yesterday, Ian Hazakostas, the game director dude, announced that there will be only 3 Torghast layers available at launch. This was pretty surprising to me and a bit disappointing because I was looking forward to the challenge. In a video I did earlier, I ran through the first 3 layers of Torghast on level 150 gear as a Resto Druid. High level 150 gear is near bottom of the barrel for first week, and you'll be easily able to get to 160 or 170. This means there's almost no difficulty involved with the completion of Torghast anymore. Considering that there's not a whole lot to do in the first few weeks until the raid is released, I was hoping Torghast would at least provide some sort of challenge. The other tougher part of this is now you'll no longer be able to create a legendary on week 1. Even though there are some introduction quests that reward Soul Ash, the first 3 layers won't reward you enough. There are some positives, however. This considerably cuts down on the grind required if you're looking to maintain alts. One of my biggest missions on my alts was to clear Torghast on all of them to max out my Soul Ash rewards. Now I'll only need to be able to do 3 layers, cutting the time it's going to take by at least 60 or 70%. This is also a lot less stress on beginning players or just more casual players that don't have the time to dedicate. Personally, I kind of like the stress and the time crunch, but I understand why it might not be a good thing in an MMO launch. In this same interview, Ian also mentioned reducing the amount of loot that drops from each boss in the raid from 5 to 3 pieces. This might be an unpopular change, but I'm actually a big fan. To me, the most fun part about World of Warcraft is the early season loot grind, where I get to play with my friends and actually look forward to looting a boss or a chest at the end of the dungeon. The less loot that drops, the longer that period goes on, and I'm totally okay with that. Keep in mind there's also no bonus rolls in Shadowlands as well. With these changes, it's going to be extremely difficult to target specific items in the raid. I can see this being really frustrating for certain classes that may depend on a big item or trinket, as you might not be able to get it for multiple months even after you've downed the boss. This also shifts nearly all the gear acquisition towards the weekly Great Vault. The Great Vault has been changed so that you have multiple options of gear to choose from each week, depending on how far and what difficulty you've progressed on. From a competitive standpoint, I like this. However, to me, it's just a bit lame that all my loot is going to be drip-fed to me weekly like some sort of mobile game. I'd rather get my loot from killing bosses, and I don't mind removing the weekly chest entirely. Also related is how the raid loot is integrated with the weekly vault. Loot from the first 8 bosses will always be available in the Great Vault. This means if you're a guild that's down 3 or 4 bosses, you can potentially get items from the 8th boss of the raid in the vault if you're lucky enough. Then, once you down the last 2 bosses, you can start receiving loot from them as well. Loot from these bosses is higher item level than all the others, so it's understandable why it's not available right away. The system feels a bit clunky to me, but I can't really come up with a better solution. The full Ian interview is quite interesting and covers a few other topics as well. He talks about mainly class balance in their efforts to make things fair, while also not impacting player investment, like nerfing legendaries or covenants. I don't want to spend the whole video talking about it, but this is a really tough tightrope to walk on for them. If you're interested in more info, I'll leave a link to the full interview in the description. There have also been many changes to XP gain and leveling throughout the beta. In previous videos, I've said that it could take anywhere from 8 to 12 hours to go from 50 to 60. In the state that the game is now, that time has been cut down pretty significantly. Des Mephisto, known for his WoW speedruns and amazing beard, completed the 50 to 60 experience in under 6 hours. This was done mostly just going through the campaign, so it's close to what to expect on launch if you gotta go fast. I'd estimate the new time to level for most players is somewhere between 6 to 8 hours depending on how fast you're going, even with your first character. There have been several balance changes over the last few weeks, many of which aimed at classes that have been performing well in the beta. The biggest of which was Discipline received a straight 6% damage reduction nerf to all abilities. Keep in mind a big chunk of Discipline Priest healing comes through Atonement, so a damage nerf is a healing nerf as well. Disc Priests were looking like a really good choice going into Shadowlands and most forms of content. However, as is tradition, it looks like Blizzard is hitting them down hard. Disc Priest is extremely well suited for top-end players in a cutting-edge raid environment, so it's not surprising to see them get nerfed, or else we'd see 2 or even 3 Disc Priests in the world first raid clear. I reached out to Mode for his thoughts on how much the nerfs hurt, and he said about 6%. Keep in mind that tuning will continue to happen all the way until Mythic Raid release. This is generally the final big tuning sweep for a tier, so don't expect just because a class, legendary, or soulbind made it to launch week that it's safe. Lastly, I wanted to share my thoughts on the game's current state. I've been getting asked a lot recently, do you think Shadowlands is ready? One thing I tell people is that it's the year 2020. Game developers no longer release finished products, and the meta of having a very polished game is out the window. In the age of freemium games, 2-year-long open betas, and early access games just aren't the same as they used to be. Even if Shadowlands has some bugs and isn't as polished as I'd like to see it, it isn't different from any other game release. One thing I will say is that the decision to delay the release was a great one. I've been playing a ton of Shadowlands beta over the last few months, and I'll say that the game has improved immensely in nearly every area, from class balancing to dungeon mechanics and the way spells are telegraphed. The player experience has improved unimaginably over the last month. Class balance for Mythic Plus is as good as it ever was. Right now, I would say tanks and healers are in a really good spot. I'd be willing to bet that the end of Season 1 ladder for Mythic Plus will be incredibly diverse. I just think the power level of some classes, especially tanks, is maybe a bit under what you'd expect, but that's also just some of those early expansion problems creeping in as well. There are a lot of people struggling with what to main, and that's a good thing. It just means that the class that's best isn't so obvious. I definitely see some people concerned that some classes are still going to be in the meta. The most prominent ones are Outlaw Rogue and Fire Mage. Both of those specs are incredibly strong right now, and I'd expect to see them in the top keys if the game were to go live today. While some other classes should definitely have their time in the sun, I don't think it's the answer to just nuke down a spec because it was good in BFA. The DPS meta is looking like it's going to be double range, so if you were playing an unpopular melee spec in BFA, you might get stuck on the bench for another season if you aren't looking to reroll. So is the game ready? I think it's ready as it should be. There are some bugs and stuff, but for the most part, I'm expecting a clean launch and to have a lot of fun. It will be up to how fun the raids are and what sorts of additional content Blizzard rolls out over the next year or two that determines if Shadowlands will be remembered as a great game. I'm definitely looking forward to it, but I can understand everyone's concern. That wraps up the recent news regarding Shadowlands and my thoughts on the launch. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe to my channel. I'll be releasing guides for Mythic Plus and Raid, as well as more advanced content down the road. Don't forget, I stream live on Twitch at twitch.tv/yumytv. Happy keying!